Hello, everyone. This is Dr Bishal Gyawali from Queen's University, Kingston, Canada, and I'm happy to be back with you all in our skills lab, How to Interpret Clinical Research with Dr Bishal Gyawali. So today we'll discuss how to read a phase 3 clinical trial publication. Let's say you have the PDF on your hand, a new drug trial has been published, a phase 3 randomized trial. So how do you go about reading that? So there are a couple of points that I want to highlight that you should look carefully in the paper even before you start diving into the paper. And what are those points? So those points are related to conflicts of interest and the sponsor of the trial or the funder of the trial. So first we need to look, even before we start delving into the paper, A, who the sponsor or the funder of the trial is, and B, what the role of the sponsor, the funder was, and C, who are the authors, and D, are there any conflicts of interest among the authors? And this might sound very surprising to you. The important thing to look at is who wrote the paper. And you might be surprised why I'm asking this question, who wrote the paper, because the obvious answer would be, of course, the authors wrote the paper. But as you will see, in many new cancer drug trials, the authors actually don't write the paper. And I'll give you some examples of that. So first, you need to check who funded the trial. Usually for new cancer drugs, almost 100% of the time, this is funded by the industry that manufactures the drug. And depending on which journal you are looking into, there are specific places where you can find this information. For example, in New England Journal of Medicine, you find this information at the end of the abstract, and so on. And second, you should also look at the conflict of interest of the authors and the affiliation of the authors. In many of these papers, you will see that there are some authors from the company itself in the authorship byline. And third, as I mentioned, if we want to look at the role of the funder. In some of the trials, you will see statements saying that the funder had no role in study design, data collection, data analysis, data interpretation, or writing of the report, which is perfect. And that is what the role of the funder should ideally be. But in many of the new cancer drug trials, you'll see that the funder was involved in designing, collection, analysis of the data, and interpretation of the data, as well as writing of the manuscript. Now, I have no problems with the funder being involved in designing of the trial and collection of the data, but the analysis should be done independent of the funder, who has a big financial stake into the outcomes. Okay, analysis is done by the funder, but the interpretation, at least, at the very least, the interpretation should not be done by the funder. But we see in most cases that the interpretation is also being done by the funder. And most importantly, the writing of the manuscript. We would assume that authors write the manuscript, but you should look carefully into the trial publication. In most of these cases, you'll see that even the manuscript was not written by the authors, but it was written by professional medical writers who were funded by the industry. And why am I being so critical about this? Is because when you write a manuscript, and if you have billions of dollars at stake, then you will try to write the manuscript in a way that will make your drug look much, much better than what it actually is. And this is what we call as spin. So if you see these red flag signs in the manuscript, that the manuscript was written by professional medical writers funded by the company, then you need to very carefully look into if there are several spins in the trials, and you should be very careful about interpreting the trial results based on how the publication is interpreting it. So do not rely on the publication's interpretation. We have to interpret it ourselves, and that's what we are going to do in this course. And just to give you an example of the conflict of interest of the authors, which can also be important in how the results are framed, even if the paper is not written by the professional writers and is written by the authors, if the authors have a huge conflict of interest, then that can also lead to bias and spin. In one of our studies, where we looked at the high payment oncologists in the United States, we saw that among these 1% of medical oncologists in the US who were considered high payment physicians, who received industry payments of more than $100,000 a year, the median value of payment they received was $150,000 USD per year. And the highest earners would earn more than their annual salary through conflict of interest, through payments from the industry. Now, when such huge amount is at stake, when people are earning more from consulting job to the industry than from their actual work, then it's not difficult to understand why people might want to present the results in a much more favorable light than what the data show. So that's some background information that we need to look into even before we start delving into the paper. Thank you.